What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today I wanted to revisit the muzzle brake attachment in Black Ops 6 because a little while back I did a full breakdown of the muzzle attachments that impact recoil, so the compensator, the muzzle brake, and the ported compensator. And after all of the testing that I did, putting all these recoil plots side by side, it was pretty clear that the muzzle brake wasn't really doing a whole lot. Sure, it helped with that first shot recoil, like it says it does in the pros, but outside of that, it seemed to give you pretty much the exact same recoil as the base recoil pattern with the guns. And therefore, my conclusion on that was it seems like the muzzle brake is either bugged or we just don't fully understand it, and it seems pretty clear that the compensator and ported compensator are far better in either case. Now, it turns out I was right about one thing, and that is we didn't fully understand how the muzzle brake worked, but Treyarch did reach out to me shortly after that video went up, and they better explained how the muzzle brake works. And it turns out the muzzle brake does have a lot more power than I initially thought it did, at least with certain guns in certain situations. So that's what we're going to be breaking down today. And if we reread the description for this, it does mention it improves how quickly the recoil pattern resets. And for the pros, it says kick reset speed is improved. Now, my assumption with this at the time with the initial video was this was meant to be describing center speed, or how quickly your gun recenters after recoil is applied, because that is a value that at least traditionally was often changed with various attachments so you could reduce your recoil that way. But Treyarch explained that's not what it is, and instead, this is the amount of time it takes to reset to the beginning of your recoil pattern. Not reset your point of aim, but reset the recoil pattern itself, since we do have stages to our recoil patterns, as well as a delay after you stop firing before you reset back to zero with that. So let's take a better look at exactly how this works. With the C9, this gun is a great example of this since it has a very zigzaggy recoil pattern and it appears to have some pretty clear stages attached to it. Although just keep in mind with these illustrations, these are just rough stages that I drew out by hand. It's not necessarily a perfect representation, it's just designed to illustrate the basics of how this works. But you can see with your recoil, if you're just holding down the trigger, for the initial shots that you fire, the C9 kicks up with a little bit of a lean to the left. Then, for the next stage, it cuts fairly hard to the right, while still kicking upward, of course. Then there's a third and possibly fourth stage, those ones might actually be blended together, where it once again cuts back to the left as it kicks upward, and the magnitude of that vertical recoil also seems to increase within this stage. So within each stage, the recoil is doing something different. And if you were to stop firing after the first 6 or 7 bullets, so you stop firing right around here before stage 1 even completes, without the muzzle brake, if you take a very short pause here, so you stop shooting for a very brief period of time and then you start shooting again, you're actually just going to pick up right where you left off toward the end of stage 1, and therefore you're going to start getting into stage 2 where it kicks to the right. And that will continue again. Like if you stop shooting toward the end of stage 2 now, and then you take that brief pause and then you start shooting again, well, now you're going to pick up where you left off there and you're going to end up into stage 3. And especially with really zigzaggy recoil patterns, this means every time you take that pause, it can be kind of difficult to tell what your recoil is going to do next because it's not resetting back to the beginning of stage 1 with your recoil. That is, unless you pause for long enough for that kick reset timer to elapse, or this is where the muzzle brake comes in, this significantly reduces the amount of time it takes to reset back to the beginning of stage 1, and therefore you can fire in bursts far more accurately while using the muzzle brake. And this actually explains why in my video, for burst weapons, the muzzle brake actually seemed to be working very well compared to the other muzzles, but for full auto guns, it didn't really seem to be doing much because I was just holding down the trigger the entire time. So you can see with my test with the C9, on the right-hand side with muzzle brake, for every one of those short bursts that I fired, which is about 6 or 7 rounds per burst, they're always kicking in a very predictable pattern upward and to the left because I'm resetting back to the beginning of stage 1. Whereas without muzzle brake, when I took those short pauses, it wasn't enough to reset my kick, and therefore when I started firing again, I never really knew what my recoil was going to do. Was it going to go up to the left, up to the right? It really just depended on where I left off when I stopped firing, and keeping track of that in real time while playing is not really practical. And I just thought I'd play a few more clips with some other weapons that I tested here, while mentioning that this effect that you get from muzzle brake actually stacks nicely with the other effect, which is it helps with your first shot recoil pretty drastically. So while it really only helps with that first bullet that you fire, if you're firing in short bursts like this, you're resetting back to that first shot very consistently, and therefore you're taking advantage of that constantly over time, much more than you would with the ported compensator, which doesn't have this faster kick reset speed, but it does have that improvement to our first shot recoil. With that attachment, you're gonna have to wait noticeably longer before that resets back to the first shot so you can take advantage of that again. So this is really nice to know, and it might seem fairly straightforward now that I've explained it and showed some testing. However, unfortunately, there's some inconsistency here as well. It appears different guns have different base reset speeds, and as a result, the effectiveness of muzzle brake is going to depend on the gun itself. Not just the recoil pattern, but also that hidden kick reset speed that we can't see. And the best example I found of this is with the KSV. Now that I understand how Muzzle Brake works, I thought this would be a great candidate for that attachment because it has a really nice S-shaped recoil plot. And like I said, the more of a zigzag you have, the more Muzzle Brake is likely going to be helping you because you can keep yourself in that one single stage of the recoil rather than dealing with that zigzag. However, using the exact same testing method as I've been using with the previous guns, I noticed even without Muzzle Brake, the KSV resets very quickly back to the beginning of stage 1, and therefore the Muzzle Brake doesn't really make that much of a difference on this gun when you're firing in these short bursts. Like sure, you'll still get that first shot recoil benefit, but you also get that benefit with ported compensator as well as a general recoil reduction, or with the compensator you get the best overall recoil reduction, and you really don't need this faster kick reset speed on the KSV, so there's really no reason to use the Muzzle Brake on this gun. And that I find to be a little bit unfortunate. I like when things are really easily displayed so you can make informed decisions, and unfortunately with the way the Muzzle Brake works in this game, not only is the description a little bit confusing, especially at first glance, even for people like myself that do a whole lot of in-game testing and generally understand a lot of the intricacies of the mechanics of the game, it's not super clear how they worded things with the description and the pros. And then on top of that, even when you do understand how it works, you don't know exactly what the kick reset speed is depending on the gun that you're using, and therefore whether or not Muzzle Brake is going to be a good choice on the gun unless you go in and do the testing for yourself. Now, this is something you can really easily test, especially in the firing range. You don't have to boot up a custom game like I do and shoot at this truck, which gives much more accurate bullet holes, and you can stand a bit further back, so you can see a bit more detail when it comes to the gap between bullets, for instance. You can see this pretty well just with the firing range wall. If you want to test out the Muzzle Brake on a gun, first try the gun without Muzzle Brake, fire in short bursts of like 6 to 7 rounds, and see what kind of pattern you get. If you notice you're getting a very big V-shaped pattern, a very wide V-shaped pattern, then Muzzle Brake is probably going to be helping you. But of course, you'll want to test to confirm, so pop Muzzle Brake on, do the same tests, and see if that recoil pattern looks significantly different. And if it does, well, Muzzle Brake may be a good option for you with specific playstyles. That's another thing I wanted to point out here. While this is a lot more powerful than I initially thought, it's really only powerful in those situations where you're firing short bursts at enemies. And at least within 6v6 multiplayer, that's typically not going to be how your gunfights go. More often than not, you're just holding down that trigger until that enemy is dead. You're not firing short bursts at them because the time to kill isn't that long. Sure, it's a little bit long for a standard core Call of Duty game, but it's not like Warzone long. And that's, I think, really where Muzzle Brake's going to come into the equation, is for the Warzone players out there. When you're dealing with people that have not only full health, but also full armor, and your standard engagement ranges tend to be significantly longer than what you would see in 6v6 multiplayer, at this point, firing in short bursts suddenly becomes a lot more practical. And therefore, the Muzzle Brake becomes a significantly better choice, at least with certain guns. But again, unfortunately, you're going to have to test that on a gun-by-gun basis to see how it performs. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for today's video on the Muzzle Brake, and this is where I'm curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. Now that we properly understand what the Muzzle Brake does in Black Ops 6, how are you feeling about this attachment? Do you see yourself perhaps using this more often than you did before? Or not? Do you think you'll just stick to the compensator or ported compensator if you're looking for more recoil control? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.